The dust cloud rose like a warning sign on the horizon as Zara Redfield strained against the ropes binding her wrists, the rough hemp cutting into her skin. The summer of 1879 in the New Mexico Territory had been cruel enough without this final betrayal that left her bound to a weathered signpost at Deeming Crossroads, miles from any settlement, with nothing but vultures for company and the merciless sun beating down upon her fair skin. Zara had been traveling west with a wagon train when she'd made the grave mistake of rejecting the advances of the wagon master's son. She never imagined he would exact such a vicious revenge, stealing her belongings, convincing the others she had stolen supplies, and leaving her to die at this desolate junction between nowhere and nothing. "Water," she croaked, her lips cracked and bleeding. The hope that had sustained her through the morning was fading with each passing hour. The distant dust cloud she'd spotted earlier now seemed like a cruel mirage, taunting her with the possibility of rescue, but the cloud wasn't disappearing. It was growing larger, accompanied by the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the hard, packed earth. Zara tried to call out, but her parched throat produced little more than a raspy whisper. She tugged uselessly at her bindings, feeling fresh blood trickle down her wrists. The rider materialized from the dust, a tall figure on a dappled gray stallion. As he drew closer, Zara could make out the broad shoulders beneath a worn leather vest, the wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, and the glint of metal at his hip where a revolver rested. "Please," she managed to rasp as the horse slowed to a stop before her. "Help me." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. His face remained shadowed beneath his hat as he approached cautiously, one hand resting near his holster. "What happened here?" His voice was deep, carrying the rough edges of someone well acquainted with the hardships of frontier life. "They left me to die," Zara whispered. "Please, I need water." Without hesitation, the man unhooked a canteen from his saddle and approached, lifting it to her cracked lips. The water was warm but felt like heaven as it slid down her parched throat. She drank greedily until he pulled it away. "Easy now. Too much too fast will make you sick." As he moved to examine her bindings, his hat tilted back, revealing piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. He wasn't young, perhaps in his early 30s, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and a thin scar running through his right eyebrow. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice hardening as he pulled a knife from his boot and began sawing at the ropes. "The wagon master's son, Elijah Thornton. I refused his advances." Zara felt the ropes give way and her arms fell limply to her sides, blood rushing painfully back into her numb hands. The man's expression darkened. "Thornton, I know of him, bad reputation." He sliced through the ropes, binding her ankles to the signpost. "Got a name, miss?" "Zara Redfield," she answered, attempting to stand but finding her legs unsteady. She stumbled and the stranger caught her with strong hands. "You've been out here too long." He frowned, studying her sunburned face. "Name's Kade Northwood. Most folks just call me Northwood." He guided her to sit in the shade of the signpost and offered her the canteen again. "Drink slowly this time," Zara nodded gratefully, taking measured sips. "They took everything I had, my money, my clothes, my father's pocket watch." Her voice cracked with emotion rather than thirst this time. Kade looked down the dusty road, his expression unreadable. "Where were you headed?" "Silver City. My aunt lives there. She's all the family I have left after my parents died of fever back in Missouri." He nodded thoughtfully, then turned to his horse. "You can't stay here and you're in no condition to walk." He adjusted his saddle and turned back to her. "I'm headed to Deeming." "It's not Silver City, but it's civilization. You can rest there, get your bearings." "Why would you help me?" Zara asked, wariness creeping into her voice despite her desperate situation. Life had taught her that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Kade's expression softened slightly. "Out here, leaving someone to die is about the worst sin there is." He held out his hand to help her up. "Besides, seems to me you've been wronged enough for one day." With his assistance, Zara rose to her feet, still unsteady but determined. As Kade helped her onto his horse, he muttered something that caught her by surprise. She's beloved. The words were barely audible, seemingly not meant for her ears at all. What did you say? Zara asked, gripping the saddle horn as he mounted behind her. Kade hesitated before answering. It's something my ma used to say, that every soul is beloved by someone somewhere. Keeps a man from forgetting his humanity out here. He clicked his tongue, urging the horse forward. Hold on tight, Miss Redfield. Deeming's a few hours' ride and the day ain't getting any cooler. Zara leaned back slightly, the solid presence of Kade's chest behind her offering an unexpected comfort. As they rode away from the crossroads that had nearly become her final resting place, she felt the first stirrings of hope since the wagon train had disappeared over the horizon. The ride to Deeming was largely silent, with Zara drifting in and out of consciousness as exhaustion and dehydration took their toll. Kade kept one arm securely around her waist, ensuring she didn't slip from the saddle during her moments of weakness. When they finally arrived at the small frontier town, the sun was beginning to set, painting the simple wooden buildings with hues of orange and gold. Deeming was no metropolis, just a cluster of establishments that had sprouted around the newly constructed Southern Pacific Railroad depot, but to Zara's eyes, it looked like salvation. Kade guided his horse directly to a modest two-story building with a sign reading Carter's Boarding House and Dining. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Zara down. Her legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her effortlessly. I can walk, she insisted, though the trembling in her limbs suggested otherwise. No doubt, Kade replied with the faintest hint of amusement, but he kept a steadying hand at her elbow as they approached the boarding house. The proprietress, a stout woman with graying hair and shrewd eyes, took one look at Zara's disheveled appearance and immediately took charge. Mercy, what happened to this poor girl? She demanded, ushering them inside. Found her bound at Deeming Crossroads, Mrs. Carter, Kade explained. She needs a room, food, and probably a doctor. Mrs. Carter clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Savages, and I don't mean the Indians. She turned to Zara with motherly concern. Come along, dear, let's get you cleaned up and fed. Zara hesitated, looking back at Kade. I have no money to pay for lodging or food. Before Mrs. Carter could respond, Kade reached into his vest pocket and produced several coins. This should cover a week's stay and meals. He handed the money to the older woman, and whatever else she needs. Mr. Northwood, I can't accept, Zara began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can repay me when you're back on your feet. Mrs. Carter nodded approvingly. Always said you were one of the good ones, Northwood, despite what some folks whisper. She tucked the money into her apron pocket. I'll send for Doc Williams right away. As Mrs. Carter guided Zara toward the stairs, the young woman looked back once more. Thank you, Mr. Northwood. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Get some rest, Miss Redfield. I'll check on you tomorrow. True to his word, Kade returned the next morning, finding Zara seated in the boarding house's small dining room. The difference a night's rest, a bath, and clean clothes borrowed from Mrs. Carter's daughter had made was remarkable. Despite the lingering sunburn and the bandages around her wrists, Zara's natural beauty was now evident. Her chestnut hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes, though still shadowed with exhaustion, were alert and intelligent. Mr. Northwood, she greeted him with a genuine smile. Mrs. Carter said you might come by. Kade removed his hat as he approached her table. How are you feeling, Miss Redfield? Much improved, thanks to you. She gestured to the chair across from her. Will you join me for breakfast? It's the least I can offer after everything you've done. He nodded and took the seat, placing his hat on an empty chair beside him. A comfortable silence settled between them as Mrs. Carter bustled over with coffee and plates heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Doc Williams says she was close to heat stroke, Mrs. Carter informed Kade as she poured his coffee. Another hour out there might have been her last. Zara's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. The doctor was very kind. He refused payment when I told him what happened. Folks around here understand the dangers of the territory, Kade said, adding sugar to his coffee. Most are willing to help someone who's been wronged. Zara studied him thoughtfully, "And what about you, Mr. Northwood? What brings you to Deeming? Mrs. Carter mentioned you have a ranch outside of town." A shadow crossed his face briefly. "Had a ranch, lost it last year after a bad drought killed most of my cattle." He took a sip of his coffee. "Been taking odd jobs since then. Ranch handwork mostly, some guiding for travelers heading west." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. "I know what it's like to lose everything." Cade's expression softened. "Heard you were heading to Silver City to stay with your aunt." "Yes. My parents died 6 months ago. My father was a bookkeeper, but he left more debts than assets. The house was sold to pay his creditors." Zara's voice remained steady, though the pain was evident in her eyes. "My Aunt Florence is my mother's sister. She wrote that I could stay with her until I find work. Silver City's growing fast with the mining operations. You'll likely find employment there." "I hope so. I was trained as a teacher back in Missouri, but I'm willing to do whatever honest work is available." Zara hesitated. "Mr. Northwood, I need to find a way to get to Silver City. It's still nearly 70 miles from here." Cade nodded thoughtfully. "Stage runs through here twice a week. Next one's due tomorrow." He glanced at her bandaged wrists. "But maybe you should rest a few more days before continuing your journey." "I've imposed on your generosity enough already," Zara insisted. "The sooner I reach Silver City, the sooner I can start repaying my debt to you." "No hurry on that account," Cade replied, cutting into his eggs. "The money means less to me than knowing you're recovered enough to travel safely." Their conversation was interrupted by the boarding house door swinging open. A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest entered, scanning the room until his gaze landed on their table. "Northwood," he acknowledged with a nod before turning to Zara. "You must be Miss Redfield. I'm Sheriff Taylor. Heard about what happened out at the Crossroads. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Cade started to rise. "She's still recovering, Sheriff." "It's all right," Zara assured him, gesturing for him to remain seated. "I'm happy to help, Sheriff." For the next half hour, Zara recounted the events leading to her abandonment, how she had joined the wagon train in Santa Fe, Elijah Thornton's unwanted advances, and his subsequent accusations of theft when she rejected him. "They believed him without question," she concluded bitterly. "Even when I begged them to search my belongings to prove my innocence." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Thornton's father has a reputation for ruling his wagon train like a tyrant, not the first complaint I've heard about them." He closed his notebook. "I'll telegraph the authorities in Lordsburg. They're likely headed that way. Can't promise anything, but theft and attempted murder are serious charges." After the sheriff departed, Cade noticed Zara's hands trembling slightly. "You all right?" she nodded, though her expression belied her words. "Just tired and angry. I keep thinking about my father's watch. It was the only thing of value I had left of him." "Some things mean more than they're worth in dollars," Cade agreed quietly. "When my father died, all he left me was his ranch and his old Colt revolver. The ranch is gone now, but I'd fight any man who tried to take that pistol." The understanding in his eyes touched something in Zara. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt truly seen by another person. The next few days passed in a rhythm that grew increasingly comfortable. Though Zara insisted she was well enough to travel, Dr. Williams recommended she rest at least until the weekend. Cade visited each day, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book from the general store, fresh peaches from a traveling vendor, a shawl for the cool evenings. They spent hours in conversation, sharing stories of their lives before Deeming. Zara learned that Cade had been born in Texas, but had moved to New Mexico Territory after the Civil War, seeking a fresh start away from the lingering tensions. He had built his ranch from nothing, only to see it wither during 3 years of devastating drought. In turn, Cade discovered Zara's passion for education, her dreams of someday opening her own school, and her quiet determination to forge a new life despite the tragedies she'd endured. He found himself increasingly drawn to her resilience and the intelligence that sparkled in her green eyes. On the evening before Zara was set to depart for Silver City, they sat on the boarding house's small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in fiery hues. The air between them felt charged with unspoken emotions. I received a letter from my aunt today, Zara said, breaking the companionable silence. She's pleased I'm coming, but warned that her house is very small. She works as a laundress for the mining company. Kade nodded thoughtfully. Silver City can be rough. Mining towns often are. I'm not afraid of hard work, Zara replied with quiet determination. I believe that about you. Kade turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. But there are opportunities here in Deeming, too. The railroad's bringing new people through every day. The town's growing. Zara studied his face, sensing there was more behind his words. Are you suggesting I stay? Kade looked away, watching a wagon rumble down the main street. Mrs. Carter mentioned the town council's been talking about opening a proper school. They've got no teacher. A school? Zara couldn't hide the excitement in her voice. A real teaching position? Nothing's certain yet, Kade cautioned, but Sheriff Taylor sits on the council. He was impressed by you, said a woman with your education and character is exactly what Deeming needs. Zara's mind raced with possibilities. But where would I live? How would I support myself until the school opens? Mrs. Carter said you've been helping with the books and correspondence. She'd be happy to have you stay on, exchange work for room and board. Kade hesitated. And I've taken a job as foreman at the Henderson Ranch. It's steady work, good pay. The implication hung in the air between them. Zara felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Northwood, are you saying? I'm saying Deeming could use someone like you, he interrupted, though his eyes conveyed deeper meaning. And maybe in time you might find reasons to make it home. The stagecoach to Silver City was scheduled to depart at noon the next day. Zara spent a restless night weighing her options, torn between the security of her aunt's offer and the uncertain but promising possibilities in Deeming. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Kade waiting at the stagecoach stop, his expression carefully neutral as he watched her approach with her small bag of borrowed belongings. You're still planning to leave, he observed, disappointment evident despite his attempt to hide it. Zara smiled softly. I'm taking the stage, yes, but only to visit my aunt and explain my situation in person. It wouldn't be right to change our plans through a letter. She's expecting me. Hope flickered in Kade's eyes. Then you're considering staying in Deeming? I've spoken with Sheriff Taylor this morning. He's arranged for me to meet with the town council when I return next week. Zara stepped closer to him. I believe I could build a life here, Mr. Northwood. Kade, he corrected gently. If you're staying in Deeming, I think it's time you called me Kade. Kade, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. And I think it's time you told me what you really meant that day at the Crossroads. He looked puzzled. What I meant, when you cut my ropes, you said she's beloved. I've been wondering about those words ever since. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something softer, more vulnerable than she'd seen from him before. My mother had a saying, that even strangers deserve kindness because somewhere, someone loves them. They're beloved to someone, even if that someone isn't present. Zara nodded, moved by the sentiment. It's beautiful. But I wasn't beloved by anyone that day. My parents are gone, and my aunt barely knows me. Kade's gaze held her steadily. Perhaps you were beloved by someone who hadn't met you yet. The depth of emotion in his words stole Zara's breath. Before she could respond, the stagecoach thundered into view, sending dust swirling around them. I'll be back in a week, she promised as the driver began loading passengers' luggage. Kade took her hand, his touch gentle against her still healing wrists. I'll be waiting. True to her word, Zara returned to Deeming 8 days later. Her aunt, though initially disappointed, had understood her decision after hearing about the teaching opportunity and had even given Zara some of her mother's belongings that had been stored in Silver City. The town council meeting went better than Zara had dared hope. Her education credentials and teaching experience in Missouri impressed them, and her composed intelligence dispelled any doubts about her suitability. By the end of the meeting, she was officially hired as Deeming's first schoolteacher, with classes to begin within the month in a converted storeroom until a proper schoolhouse could be built. Kade was waiting outside the town hall when she emerged. The smile that lit his face when she shared the news made her heart skip a beat. Over the following weeks, Zara threw herself into preparing for her new role. Cade spent his free days helping convert the storeroom into a classroom, building desks and a chalkboard. Their friendship deepened with each passing day, evolving gradually into something more meaningful. On the evening before the school was set to open, Cade invited Zara for a ride to watch the sunset from a mesa overlooking the town. As they sat side by side, the beauty of the desert spread before them, he finally spoke the words that had been building between them. "I never believed much in fate," he began, his voice low and earnest. "Always figured a man makes his own way in this world. But finding you that day at the crossroads, sometimes I wonder." Zara turned to face him, her heart pounding. "What do you wonder, if some things are meant to be despite all odds?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone, Zara. When I look at you, I see a future I thought was lost to me." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was bound and abandoned, certain my life was ending. Instead, I found a new beginning." She leaned closer to him. "With you." When his lips met hers, Zara felt as though everything in her life, every joy, every sorrow, every moment of despair and hope had been leading her to this moment, to this man who had seen her value when she was at her lowest. 2 months later, as autumn painted the desert in subtle golds and ambers, they were married in Deeming's small church. Mrs. Carter hosted the reception at her boarding house, where Zara had continued to live while establishing herself as the town's teacher. Sheriff Taylor gave the bride away, and Doc Williams served as best man. The day was made even more perfect by unexpected news. The authorities in Lordsburg had apprehended Elijah Thornton after multiple complaints similar to Zara's. Among his possessions, they had found her father's pocket watch, which was returned to her just hours before the ceremony. Cade fastened the treasured timepiece around her wrist as they exchanged vows, a symbol of how the past and future were now beautifully intertwined. With his earnings as ranch foreman and her teacher's salary, they purchased a small property on the outskirts of Deeming, not as grand as the ranch Cade had lost, but land of their own with potential to grow. Together they built a modest house, planted a garden, and began raising a few cattle and horses. By the spring of 1880, the railroad had brought further prosperity to Deeming. The town council approved funds for a proper schoolhouse, which opened its doors in September with Zara as its headmistress. Her reputation as a fair but firm educator spread throughout the territory, and enrollment grew steadily. Cade's expertise with cattle and horses brought him respect and additional opportunities. The Henderson Ranch promoted him to manager, giving him a stake in the business. With careful saving and hard work, they began to expand their own small ranch, adding more livestock and hiring 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. One evening in early 1881, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Zara placed Cade's hand over her stomach with a meaningful smile. The joy that flooded his face at the realization he would be a father moved her to tears. "I once told you that when I found you at that crossroads, I whispered she's beloved because my mother taught me that every soul is beloved by someone," Cade said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think even then, some part of me knew you would be beloved by me." Zara leaned into his embrace. "From despair to this happiness, sometimes I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," he whispered against her hair. "Every day I thank whatever twist of fate put me on that road at that moment." Their daughter, Eleanor, was born in the autumn of 1881, with Mrs. Carter serving as midwife. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a son they named James, after Cade's father. As the years passed, their ranch prospered, eventually becoming one of the most successful in the region. The schoolhouse expanded into an academy that drew students from surrounding communities. Through droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal challenges, their love remained a constant as enduring as the desert landscape that had witnessed their beginning. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Cade surprised Zara by taking her back to Deeming Crossroads. The old signpost was still there, though weathered by time and the elements. But now, instead of representing a place of despair, it marked the spot where their story began. 10 years ago, I found a woman bound to this post, Kade said, holding her close as they stood in the spot where they first met. I cut her ropes and whispered words I didn't fully understand at the time. Zara smiled up at him, the lines around her eyes speaking of a decade of laughter and joy. And now I understand completely, he kissed her softly. You are beloved, Zara Northwood, by our children, by this community, and most of all by me, forever beloved. As they rode home together, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment of greatest despair at this very crossroads to the fullness of her life, now a loving husband, beautiful children, work that fulfilled her, and a community that valued her. Sometimes fate was cruel, binding you and leaving you helpless. And sometimes it sent a man on a dappled gray horse who would cut your ropes and change your life forever. For Zara, the crossroads that had nearly been her end had instead become her beginning, a place where desperation gave way to hope, and a single act of kindness blossomed into a lifetime of love.